All right, welcome. Today we are cracking open a historical case file, a real biblical detective story, to tackle a question that seems simple but is anything but. Who actually wrote the book of Deuteronomy? I mean, for a very long time, everybody thought they knew the answer. But, when you really start to dig in, you find yourself in the middle of a full-blown whodunit, complete with conflicting clues, rival theories, and a surprise twist that honestly could change everything. Okay, so let's dive right into this. At the very heart of this mystery, you have a clash between two completely different stories about where this book came from. And we're not talking about small disagreements here. These two stories are separated by centuries and propose totally different ideas about what this book even is. So, on one side, you've got what the book itself claims. It reads like the final words of Moses, his farewell speeches to Israel right before they entered the Promised Land, somewhere back in the 1400s BC. But then you have the critical theory, which suggests it was written by some unknown scribe way later, around 621 BC. I mean, do the math, that's a 700-year gap. And the context is different too, not farewell speeches, but part of a big religious reform. So, which one is it? Now, for the better part of a century, the academic world was pretty much all in on that second theory. This view, often called the Wellhausen position, really took hold because, well, it seemed to explain some of the really odd things about the book. The argument was that Deuteronomy was a much later invention, written long after Moses, to push a very specific religious and political agenda. And the critics, they'd had what looked like some pretty solid evidence. They said the book was kind of like a patchwork quilt, with an original section in the middle that later editors just kept stitching things onto. Some even called its structure hopelessly disordered. But their biggest piece of evidence, the thing that really sealed it for them, what they called the two introductions. See, chapters 1 through 4 feel like an intro, but then chapter 5 seems to start all over again with another one. It just felt clunky, redundant, and chaotic. But the case wasn't closed, not by a long shot. Throughout the 20th century, a new generation of scholars started re-examining all the old evidence, and they began finding these little clues that pointed away from the scholarly consensus and, interestingly, back toward the book's own traditional story. The first major clue came from taking a fresh look at a key law. The Wellhausen theory really hinged on Deuteronomy 12, this law about centralizing all worship in one single place, as proof that it was all about a 7th century reform. But a scholar named B. Halawerda argued that this was a total misreading. He showed the law was actually about purging Canaanite worship practices, which, is a concern that fits perfectly with Israel's initial entry into the land. Okay, next up, another investigator, G.T. Manley. He dug into the legal codes. The critical theory just assumed that Deuteronomy's laws were a later evolution of earlier laws you find in the book of Exodus. But Manley, he put them side by side and found that actually Deuteronomy's laws seemed to be clarifying and applying those older laws for a new generation that was about to settle down. It wasn't evolution, it was application. The pieces just didn't fit that old theory. And a third clue popped up from looking at the book's big ideas. It's theology. Gordon McConville made a powerful case that if you just look at the core themes, the laws, the warnings, the promises, they're not really about a 7th century reform at all. He found they perfectly reflect the very specific situation of a nation literally standing on the border, about to enter a new land. In other words, the theology fits the time of Moses like a glove. So you've got all these clues piling up, all challenging the old consensus. But what the investigation really needed was a master key. That one single piece of evidence that could explain all the book's weird features and tie everything together. And that key, it was found in a completely unexpected place, dusty, ancient legal documents. I'm talking about something called a suzerainty treaty. Now, this was a specific type of formal agreement used way back in the ancient Near East. It was basically a contract between a big, powerful king, the suzerain, and a smaller, lesser king who was his vassal. And here is the absolute critical detail. These documents had a very specific 5-part structure, and they were super common in the 2nd millennium BC, right around the time of Moses. Then, in the 1960s, a scholar named Meredith Kline is studying these ancient treaties, and he has this incredible aha moment. He realizes that the structure of the book of Deuteronomy, the same book critics had called disordered and chaotic, matched the structure of these ancient treaties almost perfectly. And I mean, the match is just stunningly precise. Ancient Hittite treaties from the time of Moses followed this standard 5-part structure. First, a preamble identifying the king. Then a historical prologue talking about their relationship. Third, the stipulations, the rules. Fourth, the blessings and curses for keeping or breaking the rules. And finally, sections on witnesses and what happens next. And wouldn't you know it, Deuteronomy follows that exact same blueprint, point for point, almost down to the chapter breaks. It's incredible. Klein's own conclusion was a total game changer. He said Deuteronomy isn't some jumbled mess of sermons and laws. It's a formal covenant renewal document, a legal treaty between God as the great king, the suzerain, and the nation of Israel as his vassal people. And here's the smoking gun, the thing you just can't ignore. This specific 5-part treaty structure, it was the gold standard in the 1400s BC. It's exactly the kind of legal document you'd expect to see from the time of Moses. But fast forward 700 years to 621 BC, the date the critics propose, and this format was gone. It had fallen completely out of use. A scribe writing then wouldn't have used it. It's like a lawyer today writing a contract in the style of Shakespeare. It's an anachronism. It just doesn't fit.
So with this one discovery, this treaty key, the entire mystery just blows wide open. And suddenly, all those so-called problems that had stumped investigators for a century, they all start to make perfect sense when you look at them through this new lens.
Remember that huge issue, the 2 introductions that made the book seem so poorly edited? Well, turns out it wasn't a problem at all. In the treaty structure, chapters 1 through 4 aren't some redundant intro. They are the historical prologue, which is supposed to review the history between the king and his vassal. And chapters 5 through 11 aren't a second intro. They're the general stipulations, the main principles of the treaty, like the 10 Commandments. They're 2 distinct, completely necessary parts of the legal document.
And just like that, what had always looked so chaotic and jumbled was revealed to be a highly organized, sophisticated, and legally brilliant document. The treaty model gave the entire book a unified structure, from the very first chapter to the very last.
So, what's the final verdict in our little detective story? Well, the suzerainty treaty model gives us a single, elegant framework that solves all the book's structural puzzles. It fits the exact time period the Bible claims for itself, and it provides this powerful external evidence that lines up perfectly with all those internal clues other scholars were finding. It creates this really strong cumulative case for the book's traditional origin story.
And that leaves us with one last thought. And this isn't just an academic question. If Deuteronomy isn't just an old law book, but is in fact a formal, binding, royal treaty between a king and his people, between God and his subjects, how does that change the way we read it today? What does it really mean to be a citizen in that kind of kingdom? Now that's something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.